Hello, everybody. It's Philip Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is the 11th of October, Columbus Day, 2021. Our topic today is inclusion. I'll go ahead. Before I do that, let me remind you, if you'd like to subscribe, please click on the subscribe button below here on the lower right, and also the notification bell up by my picture in the far upper right. Okay. Inclusion. Let me get my notes up here. Given the strong correlation of agreement between those who promote diversity, equity, and inclusion and those who censor Confederate statues and tear them down, it can be helpful to us to deconstruct the diversity, equity, inclusion slogan. My last two episodes respectively analyzed how the terms equity and diversity should be defined. Today's article does the same for inclusion. When Mayor Levar Stoney tore down Richmond's Confederate monuments during the past 2 years, he had a one-sided concept of the word inclusion. For example, he could have left the Confederate statues in place and added new ones honoring the Black experience, as he's already done and will continue to do in terms of adding new ones for the Black experience. Now, that would have been, in my opinion, inclusive, whereas Stoney's approach, I think, has been intentionally divisive and has created hostility. To better understand his honor's perspective, however, I visited the City of Richmond website to try and learn his definition of inclusion, but there wasn't one. Moreover, none of the Ivy League school websites have one either. And like the Ivies, Washington and Lee has no definition for inclusion, although it's got a very well-funded diversity, equity, and inclusion office. Although the University of Virginia pointed to a definition by the Association of American Colleges and Universities, it is unintelligible. It is gobbledygook. It has misspellings and repetition. They actually repeat the same phrase. It's quite sloppy. Right. Perhaps all of the above, all of those institutions preferred ambiguity for the definition so that they could adopt any meaning that might suit them at some future date on some future agenda. According to critical race theory, for example, a racist is no longer identified by his conduct toward someone of another race, but by his refusal to become what they call a so-called anti-racist, which would include anyone failing to support affirmative action until Blacks collectively achieve the same academic performance as whites. That is an example of, quote, languaging away reality, close quote, by changing the definition of racist to fit into a new narrative that enables the so-called victim minorities to evade personal responsibility. If it's up to somebody else to see to it that minorities as a class perform up to the standards of the non-minorities, then the minorities as a class have freed themselves from any personal responsibility and expect to come up to par by getting gifts from the majority. They might refer to them as reparations or other means of compensating them for past problems with their race or past injustices toward their race that preceded their birth, and in many cases preceded the birth of their parents. But according to the Ford Foundation, which is an elite donor to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, quote, inclusion builds a culture of belonging by actively inviting participation of all people. We believe every person's voice adds value, and we strive to create balance in the face of power differences. Did you notice the escape clause involving so-called power differences? Well, statistics from the Foundation's own Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion annual report may explain why it is there. At the end of year 2020, 54% of the directors and trustees of the Ford Foundation were women. Within its operations, 64% of its employees were women, as were 67% of executives, 68% of new hires, and 70% of promotions. Since female employees outnumbered males at the Ford Foundation by 2 to 1 and represent nearly 70% of new hires, it seems that the Foundation's definition of inclusion is really just self-serving, to serve the interests of the majority of the employees. In case someone wants to argue that the Foundation is not typical of other elite diversity, equity, and inclusion donors foundations, a survey of its peers revealed that women represented 68% of other foundation employees. Blacks did not do as well as women at Ford, but they did better than white males. They represented 58% of employees, 56% of new hires, and 70% of promotions, and nearly half of all the Ford Foundation directors. Peter Wood, who is president of the National Association of Scholars, provides a candidly honest definition of inclusion. It is, he says, a sly word that generally means the lowering of standards to accommodate those who can't meet them. In short, it means affirmative action, which was originally intended to racially integrate college campuses so that a more diverse student body could learn from one another, or the members of that student body could learn from one another. However, when Wood's organization released its 2019 Neo-Segregation at Yale report, it showed that affirmative action barely moved the needle on integration. The problem originated in the 1960s when the school attempted to appease unhappy Blacks with Black-only programs and spaces. The report from Wood's organization shows that 90% of students, quote, report rooming and socializing with classmates of the same ethnic or racial background. According to Heather McDonald, the diversity that affirmative action is intended to create, quote, is purported to be about bridge building and broadening people's experiences. It really has the opposite effect, dividing society, reducing learning, and creating an oppositional mindset that prevents individuals from seizing the opportunities available to them. If you're in Yale or Harvard, you got in there by affirmative action, you have a wonderful opportunity in front of you, but it's your personal responsibility to take advantage of it. Finally, after decades of inclusion in university admissions, the average affirmative action student still performs badly in traditional academics. As a result, the universities have responded by providing new academic fields such as feminism and Black studies. The UCLA Law School created a discipline of critical race theory as a dumping ground for mostly Black students that did not perform well in the classic law classes. In sum, inclusion is just a new term to dress up affirmative action and make it look like something novel and attractive, whereas 60 years of affirmative action has accomplished very little. Okay, what I'd like to do now is to recommend that you get my book, U.S. Grant's Failed Presidency. If you really want to understand Reconstruction, U.S. Grant's Failed Presidency is for you. And it's also going to enable you to understand that people that have portrayed him as a racially enlightened president, or a president who did the most for Blacks between Lincoln and Lyndon Johnson, which is commonly said of him, will realize that it's actually self-serving. All his actions were self-serving. It might read, another title for this book could be U.S. Grant's Selfish Presidency. Great resource for finding out what happened in Reconstruction in the South. You can get it for $22 at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and the others. If you want an autograph copy from me, it's $25. I will deliver it at no charge for that $25 here in the United States, but you do have to email me, Phil, PHIL _ Lee, LEIGH @me.com. I think you'll find this book very helpful to your understanding of the Reconstruction in the South. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.